Hello, and welcome to today's webinar where I've called it Depression Decoded, Balancing Gut Health and Genetics for Mental Wellness. And of course, as the same with all of my webinars, what I share today is training and it doesn't replace one-on-one relationship that you have with a qualified health professional. And what I say shouldn't be taken as health or medical advice. And I've spent some time pulling these slides together, so I'm stating it here that the unauthorized reproduction or distribution of work is copyright. Feel free to share it with family, friends, but please don't copy it. So, what I'm going to share with you today is the integrative and functional medicine nutrition model for supporting people diagnosed with depression or living with low mood and other symptoms. And what I've pulled out is some of the really recent literature, some of it hot off the press this year, and this is being recorded in 2025. For me, I'm a university qualified integrative and functional medicine nutritionist. So I do have a very special interest in gut health, pediatrics, autoimmune, nutrigenomics, skin conditions, and mold illness. And I'm a professional member of the Functional Genomics Institute and also the Institute of Functional Medicine. And I support people all around the world to regain not only their gut, but their overall health, often also mental health, energy, and confidence. So depression, we've got the DSM and then we've got the ICD code where, as you can see here, there's some similarities in both of these as far as definitions around depressed mood, loss of interest, loss of pleasure, loss of enjoyment, reduced energy, reduced activity. For some people, it results in weight loss or weight gain, insomnia or hypersomnia. What else we got here? Feelings of worthlessness, excessiveness, inappropriate guilt, inability to think and concentrate, or even potentially being indecisive, ideas of guilt and unworthiness, having a bleak and pessimistic view of the future, and of course, very serious around ideas or acts of self-harm. So, of course, if you are having any thoughts of suicidal ideation or self-harm, then I highly encourage you to seek support. Here in Australia, Lifeline is the place where you can give them a call and have conversation on the phone. Mental health in Australia, I'm just sharing the statistics here. It is similar to all around the world. This is from the AIHW, where they're suggesting that it's around 20% of people, just over 1 in 5, experience a mental health condition. So this was based on a survey that they did a few years ago. 17% experience an anxiety disorder, and it's quite high. It's 1 in 7, we think, in children and adolescents. The prevalence of depression is highest amongst young women and men. So from that adolescent age group up to age 34, it's around 22%, compared to what they think is about 15% in the over 55s. It does now exceed asthma as one of the most common serious illnesses. And what I thought was really interesting in this study from the AIHW was those who accessed treatment for their depression or anxiety in 2017 in that survey they did, almost 3/4 still reported having the condition 4 years later. So I think that's something that it's important that when we're looking at functional and integrative medicine is what are some of the other things that we can be using and embracing in our toolkit that are adjunct to any pharmacological and other therapies. So what this means is integrative and functional medicine nutrition is where we're looking at what I call the non-negotiables in food and lifestyle. So it's looking at, and I'm going to talk today about diet and having the most optimal diet. It's also about supporting your body going from deficiency to sufficiency in both intake and absorption of your nutrients and minerals. It's also about dismantling dysfunction. So, this is what we're going to talk a lot about today around certain things around are there lifestyle factors that we need to consider? No doubt you've already looked at many of these for you or your child. What about genetic predisposition? We're going to talk a little bit about that today as well, and also gut health, biochemistry, and hormones. So sometimes it's about there's not one thing. So, yes, of course, there could be emotional or physical trauma, but for many people, it's also things going on in their body. It could be, I've had quite a lot of clients in my time where they've had illnesses and accidents and surgeries and certain medications, antibiotics, and then all of a sudden their mental health declines. And so, what we're trying to do is work through for you what are some of those other factors here that could be influencing. If we think about, functional medicine as a tree, what are some of the roots of the tree that we can work on, root causes and triggers? So the research. So when I'm looking at research, I'm always looking at levels of evidence. So most certainly if we're looking at systematic reviews and meta-analysis, what they're doing is they're pulling together all the studies that have been done on a particular topic. So that's where I often like to look because it's that filtered higher level. Then we see things like randomized controlled trials, cohort studies, case series, and reports. And then sometimes people just in literature will submit their opinion. So I share this with you just so you know where my head is at when I'm looking at some of the literature today. So this was a systematic review. From memory, this one was 2025. The date's not on it. The date's on here. Yeah, 2025. And so, what this piece of research looked at was 24 articles. 20 of them were conducted in China. So, when you're looking at literature, it is important to have a look to see what the methods are and, the cohort population. And what they found was that the people who had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety had a quite different gut microbiome to those who were not. Um, those in the anxiety group had certain abundance of certain bacteria, and they also had an overgrowth of other bacteria. And so, what this report is showing is that potentially there is a different balance of gut microbes, which I'll share with you a bit of an example in a minute, in the gut. This image is taken directly out of their paper. And so basically, what we've got to remember is, and what they think is when the fetus is developing, it's actually folded over. Um, the cells basically kind of grow like this. And what they suggest is that the tissue in the brain and the tissue in the gut come from basically the same type of tissue. And so what happens is the fetus grows, and then we've got this spine and then the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the really critical, important aspect of our nervous system that's connecting basically our brain and our gut. And what we're thinking is that there's certain chemical signals, immune signals, neural signals that are running up and down that vagus nerve that are basically triggered by not only the brain but also the gut. So we're thinking it's bidirectional, it's going both ways. And when there's inflammation in the gut, and when there's bacteria in the gut that's pro-inflammatory, and we're missing the good bacteria that kind of keep it anti-inflammatory, and on here they call it short-chain fatty acid producing anti-inflammatory bacteria, when they're down, that's when in this paper they're talking about, well, are there then pathological changes? And that's where they're suggesting we see these changes in the HPA axis. So it is very interesting. And here's another paper. This is again this year. This one was, let's have a look. So this was looking at the difference and the importance of dietary components, probiotics, prebiotics, psychobiotics in impacting mood. And what they were also looking at was the impact again. Here's that short chain fatty acid coming up. And what they're saying is interplay between the microbial diversity diet and brain functions offers promising therapeutic avenues to help individualize treatments. So once again, a very similar diagram, isn't it? Where we're seeing the brain and the gut, and then we're seeing this vagus nerve that I spoke of earlier. And then they haven't got a bidirectional. I suppose it's kind of saying, look, it goes up here and then back down that way. Um, and yeah, there's definitely this communication pathway. So um, when we're thinking about the gut, we do produce a lot of our neurotransmitters in the gut. Like it says here, GABA, catecholamines, histamine, etc. And so this paper, and this is the next diagram in it, talks to the various diets. Now, a lot of people are eating this Western, in America, it's called the standard American diet, the SAD diet, similar here in Australia, where many people are eating high saturated foods, high sugary foods, and what that's resulting in is this reduced microbial diversity. It's resulting in inflammation. It's resulting in bacteria being overgrown that you do not want bad bacteria overgrown. It's resulting in good bacteria not being able to thrive because they're not being fed appropriately. And what this paper has said is that does result in a higher depression risk. And look, I remember one of my first 21-day detox programs I ran, and it must have been like the third or fourth time I ran it. And I had a lady join, and she was an older lady in her 80s, and she did it to the letter of the law. And she did it really, really well. And she said to me at the end of the program, that it was the first time in 40 years, 4 decades, that she had not been depressed. She'd been depressed since she was in her 40s. And I remember just thinking, wow, like what has happened? Now, when I look at some of this research, it makes sense. What we did was in as little as 3 weeks, she took out the things that were causing her a hell of a lot of inflammation and rebalanced her gut. And it had a very, very profound impact. I've got another great story. It's a funny story. A gentleman who was young, probably early 20s, mid 20s, who did again my 21-day program. And he did really well on the program. And again, he had a diagnosis of major depressive disorder. And at the end of the program, he treated himself to McDonald's. And so, what happens in my program is at the end of the program, we still have a group session a week later to see how you're going with introducing and going back to your normal diet. And he didn't show up. And I knew of his history. And so I was a bit concerned. So I reached out to him, and it took him a bit to get back to me. And he said he was so embarrassed that he had treated himself to McDonald's after the 3 week detox because he felt so good, and he was bedridden. He said the impact of the change in the diet was so pronounced for him that his depression came back with a vengeance, and he couldn't join the call. He couldn't get out of bed. He was in a very bad way. For him, he has now changed his ways, and I follow him on social media, and he lives a very clean, whole life, is very inspiring to other people based on what he does for his work, and realized in that moment that what he was eating was actually poisoning him. And look, that's not going to be the same for everyone. So, not everyone's poor mental health is due to food. And I need to say that because, it's not. You and I know that. But for these people, it was pronounced. And cleaning up the diet can really help clean up and reduce your risk, reduce inflammation, and get more of those really anti-inflammatory and disease prevention um, metabolites going in the gut. And look, there's so many different types of diets, and I don't prescribe any particular diet. What I say is you should have a good whole foods diet as much as possible. And where I need to, I will be specific. So if you have particular cardiovascular things going on or autoimmune things going on, I might be more specific. But at the end of the day, it's about cleaning it up and moving away from that Western diet. Just, no, drink. No. Thank you. Have a good one. Oh, what has gone on with my slides? Let me go back. Broke. Here we go. All right. So, this was another systematic review. Look, this was a couple of years ago. This was 2023. And I did put this one in because it is important that you see, look, the science, whilst it's good, it's improved. But back in 2023, it was showing that the gut in people with depressive disorders has mixed results. And so what this was trying to do was to compare the gut between people with depressive disorder and what they called healthy controls. And that what they found was that there was reliable evidence for the differences, which was really interesting. And depressive disorders are characterized by an increase in pro-inflammatory bacteria, while anti-inflammatory butyrate, so those short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria, are depleted. So again, it's a very similar message to what was in the previous studies. And there is a lot. So you can look this up yourself. You can go into Google Scholar and do some reading. Uh, how we measure the gut is a poo sample. So what you want to do is work with someone who can run a good stool sample for you, where we're looking at the opportunistic bacteria. We're also looking at the keystone, good bacteria. We're also looking at the intestinal health markers. So trying to see, look, are there signs of inflammation? And whether or not you've got intestinal permeability, which is called leaky gut, more commonly. And how we know that is whether or not you've got that increased zonulin. So if you've got increased permeability and then you've got pathogenic or bacteria in the gut and the balance isn't right, you're at risk if you've got this intestinal permeability of those antigens escaping into the bloodstream. And it's when it's in the bloodstream, that's when we see this bidirectional relationship where it's then impacting not only joints and skin, but also organs, including the brain. So it's very easy to do these tests. They do take quite a while to get results. It can take between 4 and 6 weeks. And uh, you do, yeah, like I said, need to work with someone who understands how to interpret it. I do have other videos on the gut test, so you can find that on my YouTube channel. And like I said, there are these good bacteria. So there's these things called commensals or keystone bacteria, and we want them to be there. So that's the other thing. We're looking at, are there too many bad bugs, if I say that in inverted commas, but also do you have enough of the good bacteria that have got some really good research around being protective for health? So, nutrition, epigenetics, and major depressive disorder. So, this is another area where I've been spending quite a bit of time doing some research on. And it's a shame I didn't put this lady's quote in here. It is on my website from memory, where she gave a list of 20 things that have improved since working with me. And one of them was her depression went away. And of course, resulting from that is I can play with my grandchildren. I've got more energy. I'm feeling more confident. I spend more time going outside. It was phenomenal. And what we did for her was looking at not only her genetics, so a nutrigenomic profile, which is a mouth swab and looking at some of her basically genetics on how does she produce neurotransmitters, but also very importantly, something called methylation, which I'll talk in a minute. And we also looked at from memory, we did a metabolomic urine study. So, how to look to see, well, what were the metabolites in her urine? And what this paper shows, and this is just a review paper, so it's not a systematic assessment of everything. It was just someone, all of these people coming together and writing this review paper, said that diet is crucial and the underlying epigenetic mechanisms is what this paper basically looks at. So when you put food in your mouth or drink in your mouth, what genetic expression happens? So when we think about major depressive disorder, yes, of course, there's often a very chronic stress. And it could be a physical or emotional, can also be a stress internally. Like I said, for some people, it's long COVID, it's Lyme disease, they've had a severe infection, something that's going on internally, nutrient deficiencies, nutrient restrictions, all of these kinds of things impact for sure. And so, what we're trying to work through when I'm working with people is saying, right, what's going on with your diet? And again, this kind of links to the previous image around, are you including the foods that we know are really anti-inflammatory and have good ability to impact your epigenetics? And so you've got these genes, you're born with them. You get one from your mum, one from your dad on all of these different genes. They're not always expressing. So they express based on your environment. So if you're eating a lot of that sad diet, the westernized diet, the ultra processed foods, lots of alcohol, lots of red meat, processed meat, crappy oils, fast food, sugar, alcohol, I can't remember if I said that, then that's going to most certainly not only influence your gut, but it's also going to influence the expression of some of your genes, which is called that epigenetic. And what this diagram's trying to, I suppose, really bring back is saying, look, what you put in your pie hole, what you drink makes a big um, difference in your mental health because it goes through this process of not only the gut, but also this impact on your genetics. And I think the thing is, when I'm working with people, it's all well and good to say this and say, hey, look, clean up your diet, don't eat this, don't do this, do all of this. It can be very, very challenging, especially if you're very fatigued or you've got very low mood or you've got inability to make decisions because you feel so poor. Maybe you've got a lot of pain as well. We have to sometimes go slow. And sometimes doing functional testing can be helpful because we can find clues where we say, look, let's hone in on that. I'll ask people, do you want to go mild, medium, or hot? So some people say, yep, look, I want to throw out, like those people who do the detox program with me over 3 weeks. They say, I'm going to go all in for 3 weeks. I would call that hot. Whereas other people, when I'm working with them, they say, look, I need to just go mild or medium and just do things slowly. And that's absolutely fine. I think as long as you understand, how it all fits together, I'll go at the pace that works for you. Now, why am I talking about methylation and what is methylation? And a methylation is really how do you produce good DNA and also how do you detox? And I think for me, I always start in my brain thinking about a person and their methylation when they've got depression because this pathway needs to be humming quite well to be able to link in here to how do you make neurotransmitters. So you can see here dopamine, where's dopamine up here? And serotonin is down here. And serotonin's the one typically that we're looking at, the one that makes, you feel happy. Serotonin also helps you make melatonin. So often people who have depression have trouble sleeping, and it makes sense, right? So if you're low serotonin, you're low melatonin as well. What I'm interested in is what's going on. So, especially with people where they've tried all sorts of medications and they haven't worked. So, when the medications don't work, that's where we go, well, that's really interesting. What's the pharmacological intent and how is that meant to work in the body and why is it not making you feel any better? Sometimes doing a urine test, a metabolomic organic acid urine test, can be helpful because it can measure things like quinolinic acid, for instance, kynurenine. So if you're having, and I see this a lot, and this was me at one point where I had such extreme stress, and I see this often, and I actually see this quite a lot in children when they're exposed to things like mold or very significant toxins, is they end up shunting, and this is what happened to me. I ended up shunting my tryptophan down this pathway. And so what ends up happening is on this urine test, it comes up as high quinolinic acid, and it's not good. It's neurotoxic. And so what we do know is when you're shunting all your tryptophan down this way, you can't make what is needed for you to make your serotonin. So it becomes very important for me to understand the story around what happened, when did your symptoms start, all of those things. And if you're open to doing some testing, so we can work through what's going on. Because often people will say, you'll see in a Google forum or, somewhere, even ChatGPT probably would say it. I've had people tell me that they put in all their symptoms and then the AI says, do these things without actually knowing the full story. And if you take tryptophan, and you've got an issue with your IDO pathway because you're locked into this chronic stress process, you're going to make more of quinolinic acid, more neurotoxic metabolite, and that is not great. So that's something that we're looking at. What I'm also thinking about is things like, is it an input issue? So that's, clearly an input issue. Or is it the drain? If you think about serotonin and it's in a sink, are you able to fill it up? Or is it the plug? The MAO-A gene is running too fast and you're draining it too quickly. That's also part of what, is what I'm thinking about and looking at. So when you do a genetic test, it's a mouth swab. You get about 100 pages, about 300 odd genes back. And this is, one of the sections I'm looking at, the neurotransmitter section. I'm also, like I said, looking at the inflammation section and also the methylation section specifically. If you want to know more about nutrigenomics and this test, then I encourage you to watch that webinar because I talk a lot more about it in there. And like I said, it is often good to pair that with this urine because with this urine, this is that quinolinic I spoke of earlier, the neurotoxic aspect. And so we want to see, look, if that's creeping up and that's high and your serotonin is low, then bingo, we've got some ideas as to what could be going on. We're also looking to see, look, are there any issues with yeast and some of your other minerals and vitamins, not minerals, vitamins, I mean, but also detoxification. So if there's issues with pyroglutamic and it's too high, then we know that you need some detoxification support. And so again, it's stopping to go, well, could this be contributing to neural inflammation? So very, very powerful tests to look at. Another one you might want to think about is the hair tissue mineral analysis. So this gives us clues on your minerals. You take a sample of hair. It's also easy to do with children because it's not a blood draw. It also tells us about heavy metals. So if you've got a lot of heavy metals in the system, that's not helpful because heavy metals slow down a lot of this process. So they basically are like brakes on a lot of your biochemistry. So we don't want heavy metals at high levels. Another one that we may consider is an omega-3 balance test. And I haven't got an omega-3 test back yet. That is not red. That is perfect. And that is because we are in this world where we've got all of these oils which are sneaking into our foods, which are not optimal. And as a result, our omega-3, which is our good omega-3 fats, is getting out of whack and getting out of balance. And look, this is extreme. 32 to 1 is extreme. I often see 15, 18, 10 to 1. Ideally, we want 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to 6. But yeah, you can see here under 9 to 1, you end up them being in the orange. 3 to 1 or 1 to 1 is ideal. So again, we've got to think about cells, and cells need that really good quality phospholipid. And if you don't have it, and if you got a result that's something as crazy as this, then we've got to work on your omega-3, and possibly it would have an impact. I see it happening all the time. Food sensitivity testing is not something I run often. So you need to have no intestinal permeability because if you've got intestinal permeability, this can light up like a Christmas tree. But if your gut comes back and it looks like there's no permeability, but you're still having some kind of symptom and reaction, it could be, and where I run this is where I've done the gut test, we've done the gut work, and people say, just there's a food that seems to be bothering me. I can't put my finger on it. And you can see here, look, it's random. Kale for this person, egg yolk, um, you know, prawns, like it could be healthy foods, papaya. What happens if you do come back with reactions is you've got to take it out 100% for up to 6 months. For some people, it's longer, it's 12 months to see does the body forget about it. If the body forgets about it, then, it's good. It's not causing inflammation in your body. And then what we do is we retest. Now that becomes really challenging. Look, it's much easier, obviously, to take out something like lobster. But taking out things like eggs is really challenging because eggs is in a lot of things. However, if we think that it is causing low-grade inflammation, which in this person it would be, then we do it and we see where you end up. But like I said, this is very rare. I would run this for maybe 1 in 500 people. It's not a common test I run. So that's it. So if you need some help, what you do is you just book an appointment on my website. You complete the forms, send me copies of any testing. We'll deep dive into you or your child's health and family history. Like I said, it's important that I understand the whole story so I can start to join the dots. Then we order any tests if needed, and we get started with some recommendations. And so, what we'll do is at each follow on appointment, we'll go through test results. I'll give you advice on nutrition, recipes if you need it, lifestyle suggestions, supplements. I always double, triple check everything in an interaction checker if you or your child is taking any medication to make sure that there's no contraindication and yeah, answer all your questions. So if it feels like it's the right time, feel free to book an appointment. You just go on my website, thehealthygutnutritionist.com. I'm based in Canberra, Australia. I do have clinics here, pediatric clinic and a clinic where I do see adults, or you can see me via Zoom or even telephone if you prefer. So that's it for today. I hope it's been helpful. And like I said, there's the research is not stopping. So the research is coming out thick and fast. Just try to keep on top of the systematic reviews, like I said, are the best approach. Because, yeah, once you start looking at people's reviews and opinions and things, it can be a bit of a rabbit hole. So that's it for now. Have an awesome day and yeah, hope this has been helpful. Take care.